Welcome to Brand Institute of Forensics and Security. My name is Mr. Wayne. This weekend, we are focusing on lesson 6, which is disaster management resources. Disaster management resources. Yes? So we are going to, first of all, define resources, and then we go straight to the topic. Resources are anything. You all know resources. Resources, for example, water, food, plants, animals. Resources are anything that has utility and adds value to your life. Resources are anything that has utility and adds value to your life. The value of each such resource depends on its utility and other factors. Resource, when we talk about disaster management, this is the things that we need to manage the disaster or to manage the crisis. What do we need to manage the crisis? For example, we need vehicles. For example, we need people. For example, we need skilled people. That is a resource. For example, we need equipment. For example, we need torchlights. For example, we need X. For example, we need ropes. These are what we call resources. Resources are items that we need to be able to use them to manage a crisis or a disaster. And I will give you an example. For example, if there is a fire in a building, the fire alarm system wants employees to evacuate. An evacuation team guides employees to safe exits and outside to assembly areas. The fire alarm system, evacuation team, and the exits are all resources. So you see, when we talk about a fire situation, then these are some of the resources that we need to manage the crisis or the disaster. And remember, we said that the priorities when it comes to any disaster or any emergency is number 1, to save life, number 2, to administer first aid, number 3, to control the situation, number 4, to minimize further damage, among other things. I hope you can remember that from our introduction topics. When a primary facility cannot be occupied, a suitable alternate facility, if available, may be used. The alternate facility is a resource for the business continuity plan, where we shall also talk about business continuity plan. As you grow in your career, as you continue to grow in your career, you will come across such terms as business continuity plan. Business continuity plan. For example, when you talk about an alternate facility, is for example in the hotel industry, if there is a bomb blast or if there is a terrorist attack, we must have an alternative facility that if people are injured or if the part of the building has collapsed, then how do we evacuate these guests and where are we taking them? Where are we taking them? Even at family level, you should always have an alternate facility. If something happens to where you live with your family, where do you take them immediately? Where are you going to take them? These are some of the things that we need to keep in mind. So you should have friends, you should have some family members living near you. You know that if I have a situation at my house, my people cannot continue to stay there, then I'll evacuate them to this particular facility. That is what we call continuity plans, business continuity plans, or a life continuity plan once an emergency or a disaster has occurred. A needs assessment. Before we can come up with resources we need, or before we can put together the resources that we need to respond to a situation, especially at the workplace, we need first to do what we call a needs assessment. A needs assessment should be conducted to determine resources needed. Resources may come from within the business, including trained employees, protection and safety systems, communication equipment, and other facilities owned or leased by the business. Other resources from external sources include public emergency services, business partners, vendors, and contractors. For example, in the Kenyan case, we can say public emergency services, for example, the fire brigade team, the county fire brigade teams. County fire brigade teams, this is what we can refer to as an example of public emergency service. Public emergency service. So these are some of the resources, and we need to conduct a needs assessment before we can put everything together. So at your level, as you continue to grow in your career, you reach a stage as a security manager, you need to identify which resources do we need here. to respond to certain types of emergencies. We need first aid boxes, we need wheelchairs, we need stretchers, we need a security car to be on standby, we need radios for the purpose of communication, we need torchlights because anything can happen any minute during the night and the power is completely cut off. We need emergency power lighting systems. Those are what we call resources that are used to respond to disasters or crises or emergencies. And then we say the availability and capability of resources must be determined. Some are required immediately. For example, trained people, they are required immediately. For example, people who can administer CPR must be available to respond at a moment's notice. So trained people are needed. That is why we continue to encourage we continue to encourage people in the security sector go back to school to be trained and to become skilled. As a security officer, you should be able to administer first aid immediately. As a security officer, you should be able to evacuate somebody who's drowning or save somebody who's drowning. As a security person, you must be able to know that there is a fire and if the building is burning and the people are inside, which is the safest way that I can use to remove these people. That is a part of what is very important to security officers. So resources that are needed immediately include trained people, trained staff. Other resources such as plywood or other things in anticipation of a business may be stockpiled in advance or purchased when a storm is forecast, for example, during storms. We say that there are other resources that are not needed immediately, but you should have them in stock, so that if something happens, then you know that I have these things in stock. The need for disaster management resource. Assessing resources for the preparedness program begins with reviewing program goals and performance objectives. High-level goals of the resources should include one, protect the safety of employees, visitors, contractors, and others who may be at risk from hazards at the facility. So we say that high-level goals of resources should include first to protect the safety of employees, to protect the safety of people in general who are at the facility, and then also maintain customer service by maintaining disruption of business operations, by minimizing disruption of business operations, and then protect facilities, physical assets, and electronic information, and then prevent environmental pollution, and then protect the organization's brand, image, and reputation. This is also very important, protecting the organization's brand, image, and reputation. And that is why at every organization level, we have policies related to communicating with external parties or third parties in the event something happens. Who communicates with third parties? And in most cases, it is a general manager or the sales and marketing director who has the sole responsibility of communicating with the external parties so that the reputation and image of the organization is protected. Examples of performance objectives include the first team that is trained to administer fast and perform CPR will be able to reach any employee within 2 minutes. This is, for example, the objectives now. The team should be trained. Every organization should have a fire team and should have a first aid team. So in most cases, they use the fire team is also the first aid team, so that training it doesn't cost much. So we say these teams, when we do our assessment and when we do our practices and when we do the drills, we ensure that they should be able to reach employees if they are in danger or injured within 2 minutes. For example, the evacuation team will be able to direct all employees to safe exits and account for them outside the building within 4 minutes. Those are timelines. And then customer service staff will begin contacting customers within 8 hours of a service disruption using office space and telephone service provided by a business partner. Those are some of the examples of performance objectives that are set. Standards are set, objectives are set. That if there is a building collapse and people are injured, the first aid team should be able to reach people within 2 minutes. If it is a fire, the evacuation team should be able to remove everybody from the building within 4 minutes. If it is communicating with the customers due to service disruption, the customer service team should be able to communicate within 8 hours. Those are what we call performance objectives when we talk about resources utilization in response to crisis or disasters. Then we say the primary network server will be restored within 24 hours. Another says objective. Production of product A will resume within 1 week by displacing production of product B at plant B. This is what we call, these things are usually indicated in the continuity plan, that if we have a situation, how do we continue in business? How do we continue? How do we move on from the situation? We have a situation, but how do we continue? How do we continue? That is what we are talking about. So you have to keep these things in mind, that it is very important to set objectives for each area, or each item related to the resources. And then we say for each objective, an assessment of resources needed to accomplish the objective should be conducted. Simple objectives may require limited resources. Aggressive objectives will require many resources with significant capabilities available on short notice. Remember, without sufficient resources, or if resources lack required capabilities, objectives may not be attainable. So you see, you set objectives, but then you must also ensure that you have resources to attain those objectives, because doesn't make any sense to say the evacuation team should be able to remove everybody from the building and take them to the assembly point within 4 hours when you don't have the fire team trained. You see, you don't have skilled fire team. The fire team is not existing, and you are setting an objective that the team should be able to evacuate people from the building within 4 hours. That is unreasonable. So you should make sure that before you set these objectives, that the resources are available. Sources are available. And then types of disaster management resources. Types of disaster management resources: people, facilities, systems, equipment, materials, supplies, funding, info, and information. Information is also a very, very important disaster management resource. And information may be soft copy, in hard copy, or ingrained in people's minds. They know that this is what is to be done, and this is the procedure, and this is how to handle things. So those are examples of disaster management resources: information, funding, supplies, material, equipment, people, facilities, etc. The resources are needed for all phases of the program, including prevention, deterrence, mitigation, emergency response, business continuity, crisis communication, and disaster recovery. You see, in each phase, resources are needed. In each phase, resources are needed. There are resources needed for response. There are resources needed for business continuity. There are resources needed for crisis communication. There are resources needed for disaster recovery. So resources are needed for each phase of crisis management program. Let's talk about human resources in brief. Employees are needed to staff emergency response, business continuity, and crisis communication teams. The emergency response team may be limited to employees trained to direct evacuation or sheltering. So employees are required. Employees are required to staff emergency response team. So that is what we talk about, human resources. And then you can see that when we talk about human resources, we are talking about employees, and they must be there on standby. They must be trained well, and they must know how to respond to a particular situation and what is supposed to be done. And then some businesses may choose to organize emergency response teams to administer first aid, perform CPR, and use automated external defibrillators. Still, others may train staff to use portable fire extinguishers. Those are some of the trainings that are required. Then we say also in every country there are regulations that define the minimum requirements that include training and organizing employees. Some staff may assigned to work at alternate work sites if a primary work site cannot be occupied. What we mean to say that when we talk about resources as relates to human resources, just think about training and equipping them with the equipment that they need. That there is a situation, this is the equipment they need, and this is the resources that they need to use, and this is how to use this resource. So training. Then we say facilities, another resource. Facilities for emergency response include defined shelter space for protection from a tornado or interior space when shelter in place from an exterior airborne hazard is required. Facilities should also include a room that can be equipped to serve as an emergency operations center for supporting response to an incident. All facilities, especially where I was working at the Republic of Maldives, we used to have an emergency room that where we have all the equipment in readiness for our situation. You know, in the Republic of Maldives, people are always living under the threat of a tsunami occurring as it happened in 2004. You remember 2004, there was a tsunami that reached our coastline. And in these resorts in the Maldives, because these resorts are deep inside the ocean, surrounded by water, people are always on standby. We are always on standby for emergency related to tsunami occurrence. So you find that each and every employee has resources. For example, each and every employee must have a life jacket in their room. Each and every employee must have a life jacket. There must be boats on standby. That if we go into a tsunami situation, there are people we may need to remove from the resort and take them into the ocean, because it is required that if there's a tsunami, you go to higher ground. And you remember in 2004, some of the islands were totally flattened by the waves. So this is what we call an emergency room. Each facility should have an emergency operations room equipped with the telephone, equipped with the television, equipped with other equipments related to handling particular disaster or crisis that may occur. Other facilities needed include office space or a meeting room with communication equipment to serve as a communication hub. Facilities for business continuity may include alternate workspace equipped for continuation of business operations. Alternate facilities may be owned or contracted, including office space, data center, manufacturing, and distribution, etc. etc. Then we say systems. Systems for emergency response may include detection, alarm, warning, communication, suppression, and the pollution control systems. This is what we talk about systems for emergency response. Protection of critical equipment within a data center may include sensors, monitoring heat, humidity, and attempts to penetrate computer or firewalls. So these are some of the systems that may be needed for emergency response. They include detection, alarm, warning, communication suppression, and the pollution control systems. Those are when we talk about systems. And then we say every building has exit routes so people can evacuate if there is a hazard within the building. So an exit is also a resource. These exits should be designated and maintained in accordance with applicable regulations. For example, exits should never be blocked. Especially in the hotel industry, people put items behind exits, especially housekeeping and engineering. You find ladders and you find trolleys behind exit routes or within exit routes. Therefore, it makes it very difficult for people to move, for people to exit from the building if there is an emergency. That is just a photo. I just put it there to see, for you to see how the response system works or how the response system looks. I'll give you 5 minutes. You just have a look at it. You can note something down, and then we can continue with our discussion. Okay. Then we say business continuity resources. Business continuity resources may include spare or redundant systems that serve as a backup in case primary systems fail. Systems for crisis communications may include existing voice and data technology for communicating with customers, employees, and others. So business continuity resources. There are resources that are set aside to ensure that if something goes wrong, then we can continue in business by utilizing those resources. And then we say equipment. Equipment includes the means for teams to communicate. For example, radios, smartphones, wired telephone, and pagers may be required to alert team members to respond, to notify public agencies or contractors, and to communicate with other team members to manage an incident. So communication is very important. Where you are working, make sure that if you are among the security team, that you have adequate communication systems so that if something happens, something goes wrong, you can still communicate within yourself. Going back to the scenario of the Maldives in 2004 with the tsunami, the first impact was a cut-off in communication. So people could not communicate using telephones or anything. So everybody in each particular resort, and Maldives is made of around 1,200 small islands, very small islands. And in these small islands, they have developed top-end resorts, which are very expensive. Some resorts go even for $3,000 a night. Some even for $5,000 a night. So you can imagine you are deep inside the Indian Ocean. There is a tsunami occurrence and this communication. You cannot communicate with the external world. So it is quite an issue. Now, after 2004, now it is a requirement. The government of Maldives came up with the policies that each resort must have satellite telephones so that if something goes wrong, then you can still communicate with the people outside. You inform them that there is a situation and we need help. So communication. Other equipment depends on the functions of the team. Automated external defibrillators may be required for a first aid and CPR team. Fire extinguishers would be required for fire brigade. Spill containment and absorbent equipment would be required for hazardous material response team or trained employees working in their assigned workplace. Those are some of the other items that may be needed in preparedness to manage a disaster or a crisis. And then personal protective equipment, including hearing, eye, face, and foot protection, may be required for employees as part of a facility program. Many tools may be required to prepare a facility for a forecast event, such as hurricane, flooding, or severe winter storm. Those are some of the equipments that may be required. Then we see also other resources that are required are materials and supplies. Materials and supplies are needed to support members of emergency response, business continuity, and crisis communication teams. Food and water are basic provisions. Food and water. You should always have ready supplies to handle an emergency that you have been cut off from receiving any aid or from receiving any help. Then you should at least be having something that can keep you going for days as you continue to solve the situation, especially in the hotel industry and other remote areas where people work in remote areas. There should always be materials and supplies for emergency. And number one among these is food and water. Even at your own house where you stay, we use tap water always. You should always have at least two jerry cans of 20 liters where you store emergency water. Supposing water goes off completely or you are unable to get out of the house, then you need water. There should at least be water in the house and some food. And then systems and equipment needed to support the preparedness program require fuel. Yeah, fuel also in the case of vehicles for transport, then fuel is also a requirement. Emergency generators. This one is self-explanatory, and diesel engine-driven fire pumps should have a fuel supply that meets national standards or local regulatory requirements. That means not allowing the fuel supply to run low because replenishment may not be possible during an emergency. Spare batteries for portable radios and chargers for smartphones and other communication devices should be available. And then we also need funding. Money invested in the preparedness program can pay big dividends if incident occurs. Consider the benefits of a fire being controlled quickly, immediate medical assistance that saves an injured employee, or a recovery strategy that enables continued customer service. So funding, money, you cannot say talk of resources for emergency preparedness without funding. You have to talk about money. And that is the biggest problem in our country and even all over the world, because you find that funding towards resources that do not generate revenue is also another issue. So you find most organizations shy away from using money to purchase equipment that will be lying there just in a room waiting until an emergency or a crisis occurs. But this is where we go wrong, because when something occurs, you realize that we don't have wheelchairs, we don't have stretchers, we don't have first aid boxes, we don't even have fire extinguishers, we don't even have simple tools that we can use to break a door and evacuate people who are in a problem. Then we say spending funds correctly on preparedness can pay back multiple times when measured against the potential for damage to equipment, facilities, loss of staff, lost customers, and lost revenue. So spending funds correctly on preparedness can pay back multiple times. And this is where we go wrong also in our country, because you find that money is allocated to be used on emergency preparedness, and then people, you know what happens, they swindle this money, they put it aside, so the money doesn't serve its intended purpose. Corruption is a big problem. So we as a security professionals, we must be people who are above questions, people who can stay away from things like corruption, stay away from swindling money meant for crisis or disaster preparedness. We should strive always to live above those bad habits that make it very difficult, that when there's a problem, then we are unable to save people, we are unable to provide first aid because we don't have the resources. And when we go back to our budget, we see that money was allocated, but the money was not used to purchase those resources. So these are things that we need to keep in mind, even as we continue with our training, as we continue to grow you. You need to know that as a security professional, you should stay away from corruption and other things that make it very difficult for people to respond to situations. We have come to the end of this presentation, and with those few remarks, I would like to say thank you very much. We are going to meet again next Saturday for another class, and see which direction things are taking. Up to now, you should start to prepare for CAT. Because soon we are going to do a CAT. So start to prepare for CAT, mainly by going back to the notes that I hope Crispin has given you, or Fred, and then you get ready for the CAT as we move along. Thank you very much. We shall meet again for another session, and I wish you all the best in everything. Thank you very much. And keep following up what is happening as a security professional. Keep following up what is happening between Russia and Ukraine. Keep following up what is happening between Israel and Hamas. Keep following up what is happening internally in our country, because we are facing threats each and every day. We are facing threats each and every day. And if you are better informed about what is happening in the world in terms of security, then you will be in a better position. Thank you very much, and see you next weekend.